They didn't declare war. They didn't need to. The moment the Galactic Council voted to remove humanity from the network, the galaxy went quiet in a way it never had before. Not silence, nothing that obvious. Ships still moved. Signals still traveled. Trade routes still appeared active on every official display. But underneath it, something essential was missing. 3 hours after the vote, a mining convoy in the outer Perseid belt failed to receive its routing update. The delay was minor, just 11 minutes, but it was enough for 2 automated carriers to drift into overlapping approach vectors. They corrected in time. No collision. No damage. Still, the incident was logged. 6 hours after the vote, a medical transport carrying temperature-sensitive vaccines arrived at a colony world 18 minutes late. The cargo was still usable, barely. The report cited minor coordination inefficiencies following network adjustment protocols. 12 hours after the vote, a Velhari freight chain stalled completely at Junction Theta 9. 27 ships, all waiting for clearance signals that never came. That one didn't stay quiet. By the end of the first day, the Council's internal systems were flooded with small reports. Nothing catastrophic. Nothing dramatic. Just friction. Tiny failures. Delays measured in minutes. Errors that shouldn't exist. Individually, they were irrelevant. Together, they were impossible to ignore. No one said the word humanity in those early reports. Not officially. But in the private channels, in the quiet, encrypted conversations between logistics officers, trade coordinators, and system analysts, the same question kept surfacing. What changed? Because something had. Something fundamental. And the timing was too precise to be coincidence. The Council had removed humanity's voice that morning. By nightfall, the galaxy had begun to notice what else had just been removed. The Council chamber did not change for anyone. It remained what it had always been, perfectly balanced, deliberately imposing, and entirely indifferent to the individuals who entered it. A sphere of polished obsidian nearly 200 meters across, its surface broken only by descending rings of light where delegates sat according to importance. The lowest tier, closest to the center, held the species whose influence shaped policy. The upper rings were for observers, petitioners, and those whose presence was tolerated more than respected. At this hour, the chamber was active but controlled. No raised voices. No visible conflict. Just the quiet, constant exchange of a system that believed itself permanent. At the center of it all, seated in the fourth ring exactly where humanity had been placed 9 years earlier, Ambassador Kale Oren reviewed a document that no longer technically applied to him. He read it anyway. A proposed amendment to transit arbitration protocols, 17 pages of careful language designed to correct a structural inconsistency that had existed for decades. It was precise, balanced, and, as far as he could tell, entirely correct. It would never be adopted now. Oren closed the file without comment and placed it neatly into his case. Across the chamber, the Let Hani delegation was already in position. Their lead representative, Consul Vorith, stood motionless beside his seat, a ceremonial scroll held in both hands. The scroll was unnecessary, the decision had been finalized hours ago, but the Let Hani valued symbolism. Vorith wanted the moment to feel official, final. Oren noticed but did not react. To his right, Cole Farrow leaned slightly closer, careful not to draw attention. "They're not waiting for quorum," Cole said quietly. "Everyone who matters is already here." Oren gave a small nod. That was expected. Council procedure was flexible when consensus had already been arranged. He adjusted the cuff of his jacket, an old habit more about routine than necessity, and allowed his gaze to move once across the chamber. 32 species. Different physiologies. Different priorities. Different ways of interpreting the same moment. But their posture, collectively, was familiar. They believed this was under control. That belief interested him. For 9 years, Oren had operated within this room under a clear understanding. Humanity was being observed, evaluated, and, when necessary, constrained. Not openly. The Council preferred subtler methods, procedural delays, regulatory pressure, selective enforcement of existing accords. It was a sophisticated system. and, until now, an effective one. He had filed 462 formal objections in that time. 29 amendments. Countless clarifications. Each one small. Each one necessary. Each one in its own way a test. Not of the Council. Of humanity. How far they could expand. How much they could push. How firmly they could insist on being treated as equals without forcing a confrontation the Council was not ready to have. Oren had understood the game from the beginning. What he had not known, what no one could know with certainty, was when the Council would decide to stop playing it. Now he did. At the center of the chamber, the presiding chair signaled for attention. The ambient light shifted slightly, a subtle dimming that drew focus inward. Conversations stopped. Movement stilled. The system, as always, moved seamlessly from discussion to decision. Oren rested his hands lightly on the armrests of his seat. Still present. Cole straightened beside him, expression neutral. Across the chamber, Vorith stepped forward. The scroll in his hands caught the light as it unrolled with deliberate precision. There was no tension in the room. No uncertainty. Only the quiet expectation of a conclusion that had already been decided. Oren watched the scroll open. Watched the chamber settle. Watched 32 species prepare to formalize a decision that would, in their view, simplify a complicated situation. He did not interrupt. He did not object. Not yet. Because timing, he had learned, was often the only leverage that mattered. And this moment, this exact moment, was not the one that would matter most. Not even close. Consul Vorith did not rush. The Lethani never did. The scroll unfurled in a smooth, deliberate motion, its surface catching the chamber light in thin reflective lines as if the words themselves carried weight. Which, in this room, they did. When he spoke, his voice translated into something low and textured, like stone shifting against stone. Ambassador Kale Oren, Vorith said. Not humanity. Not the delegation. Oren individually. A precise choice. Oren inclined his head slightly in acknowledgement. Consul. The formality was intact. For now. The Galactic Council, Vorith continued, has concluded its review of humanity's compliance record, expansion metrics, and behavioral assessments as submitted by the independent evaluation body. There was a pause, not for effect, but for completeness. Every word in this chamber was measured. Every phrase designed to withstand scrutiny later. Oren listened without interruption. To his left, a delegate from the upper rings shifted slightly, the movement subtle but noticeable. Anticipation, perhaps. Or discomfort. Most of them would not enjoy this. But they would accept it. The findings, Vorith said, are as follows. The chamber seemed to contract, not physically, but in attention. 32 species focusing on a single outcome. Humanity, as a member species of the Galactic Council, is hereby suspended from all deliberative proceedings, voting privileges, and formal representation, effective immediately. No reaction. Not from Oren. Not from Cole. The duration of this suspension, Vorith continued, is indefinite, pending a comprehensive psychological and sociological reassessment to determine long-term compatibility with Council frameworks. Still nothing. A few delegates glanced, quick, involuntary movements, toward the fourth ring. Toward the human seat. Oren remained exactly as he had been. Still attentive. Present. All human delegates are instructed to vacate assigned roles within 14 standard days, Vorith said. All associated trade, transit, and resource allocations will be reviewed and adjusted under suspended member protocols. The scroll rolled closed. The sound was soft. Final. Vorith looked up. Directly at Oren. There was. The moment the chamber had been waiting for. Not the decision that had already happened. The reaction. How does a species respond when it is removed from the system it spent nearly a decade integrating into? Anger? Protest? Desperation? Oren gave them none of it. He let the silence sit. 1 second. 2, 3. Long enough to be noticed. Not long enough to be interpreted as hesitation. He rose to his feet with the same measured control he had used to enter the chamber. Every movement precise. Every gesture intentional. I would like the official record to reflect, Oren said, his voice calm and perfectly level, that the human delegation formally disputes the procedural validity of this vote. A flicker. Small but real. Several delegates shifted again. Voritha's expression, such as it could be read, stilled further. On what grounds? The Lethani Council asked. On the grounds, Oren said, that the evaluation body responsible for the behavioral assessment conducted its review without human representation during the deliberation phase. He paused, just enough to ensure clarity. In direct violation of Article 17 of the Council's founding accord. Silence. Different this time. Not anticipation. Calculation. Vorith blinked once. A small movement, but significant. The objection is noted, he said. Thank you, Oren replied. No escalation. No argument. Just acknowledgement. I would also like the record to reflect, Oren continued, that humanity will be filing a formal challenge to this decision within 48 hours. A delegate in the second ring made a faint, almost involuntary sound, quickly suppressed. Vorith inclined his head slightly. That is your right, he said. Though, as a suspended member, your challenge will be reviewed on a delayed basis. Of course, Oren said. I would expect nothing less. And that was it. No raised voice. No dramatic exit. No appeal to fairness or emotion. Just process. Just record. Just a quiet insistence that the rules, their rules, still applied. Oren reached down, closed his case, and straightened. He did not look around the chamber again. There was nothing left to see here. Not today. Ambassador. The voice came from the middle rings. A different species. Unidentified to most, but not to Oren. Hesitation. Uncertainty. He did not turn. Not fully. Just enough to acknowledge the sound without engaging it. The delegate did not continue. The moment passed. Oren adjusted his jacket, again, that same small, habitual motion, and stepped away from his seat. Cole moved with him immediately, falling into place half a step behind and to the right. Neither of them spoke. The chamber watched. Not openly, most were too disciplined for that, but attention followed them all the same. The human delegation. Leaving. Not escorted. Not forced. Just walking out. Which, in its own way, was more unsettling. At the edge of the fourth ring, Oren paused briefly, not long enough to suggest doubt, just long enough to align his path with the corridor ahead. Then he continued. The sound of his shoes against the polished floor was almost imperceptible. But in the silence of the chamber, it carried. Behind him, the council did not speak. They would resume, of course. There were 17 items on the agenda. Important matters. Urgent considerations. The business of governance did not stop for a single species. Even one as complicated as humanity. The doors at the end of the corridor opened automatically as Oren approached. Bright white light spilled into the darker tones of the chamber entrance. Sterile. Neutral. He stepped through without slowing. Cole followed. And just like that, humanity was no longer in the room. The doors closed behind them with a soft, seamless sound. Inside the chamber, the council shifted. Not visibly. Not dramatically. But something had changed. The decision had been executed. The system had functioned. And yet, the absence left behind felt larger than expected. One of the upper ring delegates leaned slightly toward another. Was that all? They asked, quietly enough to avoid record. The reply came just as softly. It should be. The pause. Then less certain. It has always been before. But neither of them sounded convinced. In the corridor outside, the air was cooler, filtered, carrying that faint antiseptic scent the station used to maintain atmospheric balance across dozens of species. Oren walked without breaking stride. Cole kept pace easily. They made it halfway down the corridor before Cole spoke. That was fast, he said. Yes, Oren replied. The beat. And clean. Oren allowed himself the smallest fraction of a breath. Very clean. They walked in silence for several more steps. Then Cole glanced at him. What do we do now? Oren reached into his jacket pocket and removed a thin, matte black communicator. Unremarkable in appearance. Extremely not unremarkable in function. He activated it with a single touch. No hesitation. No reconsideration. Just action. He typed 3 words. Read them once. Then sent the message. Cole leaned slightly, just enough to see. He frowned. That's it. That's it, Oren said. They kept walking. The reply came 11 seconds later. The device vibrated once in Oren's hand. He glanced down. 2 words. Nothing more. He closed the communicator and returned it to his pocket. Cole exhaled quietly. Well. Oren looked ahead, toward the end of the corridor. Toward the door that led out of the council's controlled environment and into everything beyond it. It means, he said evenly, they just made a very serious mistake. The corridor opened into a transit concourse that was almost empty at this hour. Wide, white, and quietly humming with the low-frequency vibration of systems designed to move thousands of beings efficiently without ever appearing rushed. Overhead, directional lights shifted in soft gradients, guiding traffic that wasn't there. Oren slowed, not because he needed to, but because timing mattered. Everything after this point would depend on timing. Cole noticed. You're thinking, he said. I'm counting, Oren replied. A small distinction. An important one. They reached the edge of the concourse where a line of observation windows stretched along the outer curve of the station. Beyond the glass, space opened in a vast, silent expanse. Distant stars, slow-moving cargo lanes, and the faint glow of orbital infrastructure. Normal. Everything looked normal. That Oren knew would not last. Cole folded his arms lightly. I read the message, he said. 3 words. No context. No instructions. Oren said nothing. Cole glanced at him again. And the reply, he added. 2 words. Still nothing. That's not much to build a response on. Oren's gaze remained fixed on the stars. It's enough, he said. Cole frowned slightly, thinking it through. They were expecting this, he said after a moment. Yes. For how long? Oren considered the question. Long enough that the timing is not a surprise, he said. That's not an answer. It's the only one that matters. Cole let out a quiet breath through his nose. Behind them, a transit pod slid silently into position, its doors opening with a soft chime that echoed faintly across the concourse. No one boarded. No one exited. The system continued to operate, unaware or unconcerned with what had just changed. Cole shifted his weight. So what happens now? He asked. Oren turned away from the window. Now, he said, we wait. Cole blinked. That's it. For the moment. That's not exactly reassuring. It's not meant to be. Cole studied him for a second longer. You're not surprised, he said. No. You're not concerned. A slight pause. I'm attentive, Oren corrected. That's not the same thing. No, Oren agreed. It isn't. He started walking again, moving past the idle transit pod without acknowledging it. Cole followed immediately. The concourse stretched ahead in clean, uninterrupted lines. Everything about the station was designed for clarity, efficiency, control, which made what was about to happen particularly disruptive. They think this ends here, Cole said. Yes. They think removing us from the council removes our influence. Yes. Cole shook his head slightly. They really believe that. They do. Another few steps. Cole glanced sideways. And they're wrong. Oren's expression did not change. Yes, he said. They are. They reached the far end of the concourse where the exit doors led toward the external transit platforms. The lighting shifted subtly again, adjusting for a different atmospheric profile beyond the threshold. Oren stopped. Not abruptly. Deliberately. Cole stopped with him. What are we waiting for? He asked. Oren checked the time. Now, he said quietly. Cole followed his gaze. Nothing obvious had changed. No alarms. No alerts. No visible disruption. Just the same steady flow of station operations continuing exactly as designed. A flicker. So brief it could have been missed. The overhead guidance lights dimmed for less than a second before stabilizing again. Cole straightened. Did you? Yes. Another flicker. This time longer. A nearby terminal screen refreshed unexpectedly, its display shifting through 3 different status panels before returning to its original state. Still subtle. Still deniable. But no longer random. Cole's expression sharpened. That's not a malfunction. No, Oren said. It isn't. Across the concourse, a service drone paused mid-route, recalibrating its path before continuing on a slightly adjusted trajectory. Somewhere deeper in the station, a low-priority alert chimed. Too quiet for most to notice, but present. The system was correcting itself. Or trying to. Cole looked at Oren again. This is it, he said. Yes. That message. Triggered a sequence, Oren finished. Cole's eyes narrowed slightly as he processed that. What kind of sequence? Oren didn't answer immediately. He watched the concourse for another few seconds as the small inconsistencies continued. Minor delays, tiny recalculations, subtle inefficiencies creeping into a system that had been optimized for decades. Then he spoke. The kind, he said, that doesn't look like anything is happening. Cole let out a quiet breath. But something is. Yes. How widespread? Oren glanced once more at the observation window behind them, at the distant traffic lanes and orbital platforms. Not yet enough to trigger a response, he said. Soon enough to make one unavoidable. Cole absorbed that. They won't connect it to us right away. No. They'll think it's a system fault. Yes. And by the time they realize it isn't. Oren met his gaze. It will already be too late to treat it like one. Silence settled between them. Not empty. Focused. Cole nodded once, slowly. Okay, he said. The beat. Okay. Another flicker passed through the concourse lighting, longer this time, just enough for a few distant figures to pause and glance upward before continuing on. The system was still functioning. But it was no longer seamless. And seamless, in a structure like this, was everything. Cole exhaled again, this time with something closer to understanding. They didn't just remove us from the council, he said. No. They removed us from the system. Oren adjusted his jacket one more time, the motion as precise and habitual as ever. They removed our access, he said. Not our presence. He turned toward the exit doors. They made a procedural decision, he continued, based on the assumption that influence is granted by position. Cole followed, a step behind. And it isn't. Oren placed his hand against the access panel. The doors responded instantly, sliding open to reveal the darker, colder space of the external platform beyond. No, he said. It's built. A sharp breath of outside air met them as they stepped through, cooler, thinner, carrying the faint metallic edge of a station that existed on the boundary between controlled environment and open space. Behind them, inside the concourse, another system recalibration chimed. Then another. Contained. Manageable. For now. Oren did not look back. Come on, he said. Cole fell into step beside him. Where are we going? Oren's gaze lifted toward the distant docking platforms, where ships moved in slow, precise patterns against the backdrop of space. To let them notice, he said. Far above them, deep within the Council's internal systems, the first priority one anomaly report was filed. It was categorized as minor, non-critical, a temporary coordination inefficiency. It would not remain categorized that way for long. Oren walked on, steady and unhurried, as the first invisible cracks began to spread through a system that had just decided it no longer needed him. Or humanity. And somewhere, far from the council chamber, someone who had been waiting for this moment for a very long time, was already moving. The first system to feel it properly was not important. It wasn't politically central, economically dominant, or strategically critical in any way that would place it on a council priority list. It was a mid-tier relay hub orbiting a gas giant in the Corvin system, functional, unremarkable, and almost entirely ignored by anyone who didn't need it. Which made it perfect. Station Corvin 7 did not look like the kind of place that held leverage over half a dozen trade routes. It looked like maintenance. Gray hull plating. External scaffolding. rotational segments that creaked just slightly under load, though never enough to fail inspection. Its corridors were wider than necessary and less polished than the Council preferred for official infrastructure. Nothing about it suggested importance. Inside, Commander Yara Solis was on her 31st consecutive hour awake when the first anomaly report crossed her screen. She didn't react. Not immediately. She read it once. Then again. A routing delay. 11 minutes. Outer Perseid belt. She exhaled slowly and reached, not for a diagnostic panel, but for a folder buried 3 layers deep in her system. It was labeled simply, Scenario 14. No priority marker. No warning flags. Just a number. She opened it. Dozens of subfiles populated the display instantly. Contingency frameworks, routing maps, legal overlays, response trees. Years of work. Quiet work. The kind that didn't get reported upward unless someone asked very specific questions. No one had. Not in the right way. Yara selected a subfile. 14C, full network transition. Her fingers hovered over the interface for half a second. Then she activated it. Across Corvin 7, systems began to shift. Not dramatically. Not in a way that would trigger alarms. Just a reallocation of processes, bandwidth here, routing priority there, small adjustments that, individually, meant nothing. Together, they meant everything. Commander! The voice came from behind her. Yara didn't turn. Sit down, Laura, she said. Laura Hale, her deputy, moved quickly to the adjacent station, setting a cup of something hot beside Yara without asking. What are we looking at? Laura asked. Confirmation, Yara said. Of what? Yara brought up a network map. It spread across the display in layered lines. Routes, nodes, relays, connections spanning systems most council delegates never thought about. At first glance, it looked incomplete, fragmented, disconnected. Then Yara adjusted the overlay. The lines changed, connected, expanded. The web. Efficient. Independent. Laura leaned forward slightly. That's not council infrastructure, she said. No. Laura's eyes moved across the map, tracking the routes. How many nodes are those? 112 primary, Yara said. Plus secondary relays. Laura blinked. Since when? Yara allowed herself the faintest hint of a smile. Since we realized relying on someone else's system was a temporary solution. Laura sat back. They didn't know about this. No. They inspected some of these stations. Yes. And they still didn't see it. They weren't looking for it. Laura let that settle. They thought we were integrating. Yara nodded once. We were, she said. Just not exclusively. On the main display, small indicators began to shift. Green to amber. Amber to green. Routes adjusting. Traffic redistributing. Human ships, hundreds of them across multiple systems, subtly altering course as new instructions propagated through channels the Council did not monitor. Not because they couldn't. Because they didn't know they existed. Laura's hands moved across her console. They're already feeling it, she said. Minor disruptions, Yara replied. For now. Laura pulled up external reports. Perseid belt delay confirmed, she said. Theta, 9 junction backlog starting to form. Yara nodded. Good. Laura glanced at her. You want it visible? Yes. Not catastrophic. No. Just enough to be noticed, Yara finished. Silence settled between them for a moment as the system continued to adjust. Every change precise. Every shift calculated. No randomness. No chaos. Just control. Laura looked back at the network map. This isn't a backup, she said. No. It's a parallel system. Yes. Fully operational. For 6 years. Laura turned to her. You've been running this for 6 years without anyone realizing? Not without anyone realizing, Yara said. Without anyone important realizing. Laura let out a quiet breath. And now? Yara's gaze remained on the display. Now we stop hiding it. She tapped a command. Across the network, relay stations that had been operating at partial capacity increased output. Signal strength climbed. Routing efficiency improved, for human traffic. For everyone else. Variability. Delays. Gaps. Nothing that could be called sabotage. Everything that could be called absence. Laura watched the metrics update in real time. They're going to try to compensate, she said. Yes. They'll reroute through their own systems. Yes. And when that fails? Yara finally leaned back in her chair. They'll start asking questions. Laura nodded slowly. And the answers? Yara glanced at her. Will be available, she said. But not for free. Another pause. Laura looked back at the network. At the scale of it. At the quiet, deliberate architecture of something that had never been announced. Never displayed. Never claimed. Built piece by piece in places no one bothered to look closely. They thought they could isolate us, Laura said. Yara's expression didn't change. They can remove us from their network, she said. They cannot remove us from ours. On the far edge of the display, a new alert appeared. Priority 1. Incoming communication request. Laura checked the source. Velhari Trade Consortium, she said. That was fast. Yara nodded once. Put it through. The screen shifted. A small, compact figure appeared, rust-colored, with large pale eyes that moved independently as they focused on the feed. Commander Solis, the translator rendered. I am Consul Dina of the Velhari Trade Authority. Yara inclined her head slightly. Consul. There have been irregularities, Dina said carefully, in several outer system routes previously coordinated through human channels. Yara didn't respond immediately. She let the silence sit. Not long. Just long enough. We are aware, she said. Dina's eyes adjusted slightly. These irregularities are affecting transit efficiency. Yes. Will they be corrected? Yara folded her hands lightly on the console. That depends, she said. On what? Yara held her gaze. On whether there is a reason to correct them. Another pause. Longer this time. Dina processed that. Behind her, unseen but implied, systems were likely updating. Advisors listening. Calculations being made. You are suggesting, Dina said slowly, that these services are no longer automatic. They never were, Yara replied. They were informal. Dina's eyes shifted again. Informal arrangements can be formalized. Yes, Yara said. They can. And if they are not? Yara's expression remained perfectly neutral. Our freight continues to move, she said. Dina understood. That was the important part. Not the words. The implication. The call ended shortly after. Professional. Unresolved. Laura exhaled quietly once the screen went dark. That won't be the last one. No, Yara said. It won't. She looked back at the network. At the 112 routes. At the quiet system that had just begun to reveal itself. They removed our seat, Laura said. Yara nodded. They didn't remove anything else. Outside Corvin, 7, ships adjusted course. Signals strengthened. Paths shifted. And across the galaxy. Systems that had quietly depended on human coordination for years began to realize just how much they had been relying on something they never officially acknowledged. The second call came 18 minutes after the first. Then another. And another. By the end of the hour, Corvin 7's inbound communication queue had reorganized itself entirely, not by priority, but by urgency disguised as routine. Trade inquiries. Routing clarifications. Minor coordination issues. None of them used the word problem. None of them mentioned the Council's decision. But every single one of them traced back to the same absence. Yara didn't rush to answer. She let them wait. Not long enough to be offensive. Just long enough to establish something new. When she accepted the next call, she already knew what it would be. A different species this time. Larger frame. Slower speech pattern. The translators struggled slightly to keep pace. Commander Solis, the voice rendered. We are experiencing delays on lanes previously optimized through human coordination protocols. Yara inclined her head slightly. That is correct. We require those protocols to be restored. Yara didn't respond immediately. Behind her, Laura watched the metrics continue to shift, traffic patterns adapting, inefficiencies spreading outward like ripples in water. Those protocols, Yara said finally, were not part of any formal council agreement. The figure on the screen stilled. They were necessary. They were effective, Yara corrected. The pause. Then restore them. Yara's tone remained even. On what basis? The question hung there. Simple. Precise. Difficult to answer. The figure hesitated, not because it lacked authority, but because the framework it operated within had just changed. We are a council member species, it said. Yes, Yara replied. And we require. You have access to council infrastructure, Yara said calmly. You are free to utilize it. Another pause. Longer this time. It is insufficient. Yara leaned back slightly. Then you have identified a gap in your logistics network, she said. That is correct. And you are requesting assistance in addressing that gap. Yes. Yara nodded once. Then we can discuss terms. There was not aggression, not defiance, just a shift. The figure on the screen processed that. This assistance, it said carefully, would be provided under what conditions? Yara brought up a document. Not new. Prepared. Refined. Waiting. Formal recognition of human transit coordination as a contracted service, she said. A mutual non-interference clause regarding independent routing systems. Shared data access on outer system hazards. And a 30-day notice requirement for any changes affecting joint routes. She delivered the terms without emphasis. No pressure. No negotiation tactics. Just clarity. On the other end, silence. Not confusion. Evaluation. These conditions, the figure said slowly, are reasonable. I agree, Yara said. They do not reference the council's decision. They do not need to. Another pause. We will review internally. Of course. The call ended. Laura exhaled softly. That's one. Yara didn't look away from the display. It's the first, she said. There will be more. Laura glanced at the queue. There already are. Yara nodded. Good. Across the network, the pattern repeated. Different species. Different phrasing. Same underlying problem. Systems that had relied, quietly, informally, efficiently, on human coordination were now operating without it. And they were not performing well. Not failing. That was important. Failure would trigger emergency responses. Crisis protocols. Unified action. This was worse. This was friction. Persistent. Irritating. Costly. Difficult to justify. Harder to fix. On the outer edge of the Velhari trade region, 27 ships remained stalled at Junction Theta 9. Not because they couldn't move. Because they couldn't move efficiently. Every available route required recalculation. Every recalculation introduced delay. Minutes stacking into hours. Hours into losses. Consul Dina watched the projections update in real time. Her advisors spoke in low tones behind her, probability models, cost analyses, risk assessments. All of them converging on the same conclusion. They needed the humans. Not officially. Not politically. But functionally. And function, in systems like this, mattered more than declarations. She opened a channel. Not to the council. To Corvin 7. Commander Solis, she said when the connection stabilized. Consul, Yara replied. Dina's eyes adjusted, focusing. We have reviewed your terms. Yara waited. We are prepared, Dina said, to formalize the arrangement. Laura glanced sideways at Yara. Yara didn't react. Under the conditions outlined, Dina continued. Yes, Yara said. There will be no public acknowledgement linking this agreement to current council actions. Understood. Dina paused. You anticipated this. Yara considered that. Yes, she said. For how long? Long enough. Dina studied her. You built an independent network, she said. At significant cost. Yes. Without knowing you would need it. Yara's gaze remained steady. We built it, she said, because we believed we would. A subtle shift in Dina's posture, understanding, respect, something adjacent to both. Then we will proceed, Dina said. The agreement finalized minutes later. Efficient, binding, and entirely outside the Council's control. Back on Corvin 7, Laura leaned back in her chair. That's going to ripple, she said. Yes. Others will follow. Yes. They won't have a choice. Yara finally allowed herself a small exhale. Choice is still involved, she said. Just constrained. Laura nodded. Across the display, more requests continued to populate the queue. Different species. Same need. Same realization, spreading quietly through systems that had never bothered to quantify how much they relied on human coordination. Until now. They thought influence came from a seat at the table, Laura said. Yara's eyes remained on the network. They thought correctly, she said. Laura frowned slightly. That doesn't sound like you. Yara glanced at her. Influence does come from position, she said. The beat. But dependence, she added, comes from function. Laura looked back at the display. At the routes. At the ships adjusting course. At the network, no longer hidden, beginning to assert itself not through force, but through necessity. And right now, Laura said slowly, they need us. Yara nodded once. Yes, she said. They do. Far away, deep within the Council's administrative core, the anomaly reports had begun to change classification. No longer minor. No longer isolated. A pattern was emerging. Not yet understood, but impossible to ignore. And for the first time since the vote, someone, somewhere inside that system, said the word out loud. Humanity. On Corvin 7, Yara Solis continued working, calm and precise, as the first true shift in power began to take shape. Not through conflict. Not through force. But through something far more difficult to counter. Control of what others needed. And could no longer replace. The notice arrived without urgency. That was how the Council preferred to do these things. No alarms. No escalation in tone. Just a formal transmission, cleanly formatted, precisely worded, carrying the weight of authority in its structure rather than its volume. 2. Human vessel bright current from Council Enforcement Frigate Arbitrum. You are hereby instructed to hold position for inspection under suspended member trade compliance protocols. Failure to comply may result in asset seizure. Captain Grace Ford read it twice. Then she leaned back in her chair and exhaled slowly. Around her, the bridge of the bright current remained steady, crew at stations, systems humming, cargo secured. Nothing had changed. Except everything had. Position, she asked. Stable, her navigation officer replied. Syrah spelt entry vector holding. Distance to Arbitrum? Closing. Slow approach. Ford nodded once. No panic. No sudden movements. Just the quiet understanding of what this was. The test. She opened a secure channel. 2. Corvin 7. Priority immediate. Receiving enforcement notice. Possible seizure attempt. Request guidance. She hit send. Then she waited. The reply came in under 30 seconds. Forwarded. Not from Yara directly. From Kale Oren. 2 lines. Hold position. Review legal basis. Ford allowed herself a small, almost invisible smile. All right, she said quietly. Let's read. Back on Corvin 7, Yara didn't hesitate. Pull scenario 14C, she said. Laura was already moving. Page 41. Subsection. Asset seizure protocols. Laura brought it up instantly. Yara scanned the text, though she didn't need to. She knew it. She had written it. Forward it to Oren, she said. Already done. Good. Yara turned to the wider display. The Saras belt lit up, asteroid clusters, mineral zones, transit paths. 2 ships marked at its center. Green. And amber. Track everything, Yara said. Communications, positioning, power signatures. Laura nodded. You think they'll push it? Yara's eyes didn't leave the screen. They think it's simple, she said. The beat. That's what makes it dangerous. 7 hours later, the resolution entered the system. No announcement. No dramatic arrival. Just a new marker appearing on the edge of the tactical display. Closing fast. On the bright current, Ford saw it immediately. Contact, her officer said. Human signature. Ford didn't look surprised. Of course it is. She opened the channel. Incoming message, resolution. Maintain position. Legal support en route. Ford nodded once. Understood, she said. Then she leaned back and waited. The resolution didn't slow as it approached. It didn't need to. Its trajectory was precise, calculated to place it between the bright current and the arbitrum without ever appearing to block either. Not defensive. Not aggressive. Just present. On board the resolution, Cale Oren stood on the bridge, hands loosely behind his back. Captain Arthur Gale didn't speak immediately. He watched the display. Measured. Larger ship, Oren said, nodding toward the arbitrum. Yes, Gale replied. More visible. Oren smiled slightly. That's the point. The beat. They expect visibility to be enough. Gale glanced at him. And us. Oren's gaze stayed on the display. We expect clarity to be enough. Incoming hail, the comms officer said. Gale nodded. Put it through. The voice that came through was sharp. Controlled. Confident. Human vessel. You are entering a designated enforcement zone. This is a council matter. Withdraw immediately. Gale didn't answer. He looked at Oren. Oren stepped forward slightly. This is Ambassador Cale Oren, he said calmly. Advisory capacity. We are here to review the legal standing of the enforcement action currently underway. The pause. This is not a diplomatic matter. Oren didn't react. Any enforcement action against a human vessel, he said evenly, is precisely a diplomatic matter. Silence. You are a suspended member. Yes, Oren said. The beat. That does not invalidate bilateral treaties. Another pause. Smaller this time. Less certain. Oren continued. I would like to direct your attention to Article 42 of the Saras Compact, ratified 2219. Contested seizure actions in this region require a 3-party arbitration process prior to enforcement. No one moved on the bridge. No one spoke. The words hung there, clean, specific, verifiable. You have not initiated arbitration, Oren added. Your current posture constitutes a violation of that treaty. Silence. Not strategic. Not intentional. Just silence. On the arbitrum, somewhere behind that transmission, someone was checking records. Cross-referencing. Realizing something hadn't gone the way it was supposed to. We are aware of the compact, the voice said finally. Good, Oren replied. Then you understand that we are not here to obstruct a legal action. The beat. We are here to ensure that an illegal one does not proceed. Another pause. Longer. Heavier. You have no standing. Oren nodded slightly, as if agreeing with something else entirely. The compact, he said, is not a council document. A fraction of a second. It is a bilateral treaty. He let that settle. My status within the council does not affect treaty rights. On the bridge, Captain Gale remained completely still. No orders. No adjustments. Weapons untouched. Crew calm. The entire ship holding position like a statement that didn't need to be spoken. If you believe otherwise, Oren continued, we are prepared to wait while you consult your legal advisors. A slight tilt of his head. We have time. The answer came slower now. Measured. Careful. How long will you wait? Oren didn't hesitate. As long as necessary. The pause. The cargo in question is perishable, he added lightly, which introduces certain complications regarding damages if the seizure proceeds unlawfully. Silence. But different now. Not confusion. Calculation. 3 ships. 1 larger. 1 smaller. 1 changed. On the bright current, Ford watched the exchange unfold. No weapons fire. No escalation. Just words. And position. And something else. Confidence. Not loud. Not aggressive. But unshakable. Hours passed. 3 hours. 17 minutes. No one moved. Not really. The resolution remained exactly where it was. Not blocking. Not threatening. The Arbitrum held position. Not advancing. Not retreating. Caught between authority and uncertainty. Movement. Contact shifting, the officer said. All eyes went to the display. The amber marker turned slowly, deliberately, beginning a new vector. Away. No announcement. No acknowledgement. Just a course correction. Framed as intention. Disguised as choice. Ford let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Resolution, she said over the channel. Can you confirm? Confirmed, came the reply. They are withdrawing. The pause. Proceed on your route. On the resolution, Gale folded his arms. Well, he said quietly. Orin didn't smile. They expected compliance, he said. The beat. They encountered preparation. Gale nodded. That matters. Yes, Orin said. It does. He turned back to the display, watching the Arbitrum disappear into distance. Not defeated. Not destroyed. But something more important. Corrected. Send the full recording, Orin said. Distribution? Everything we have access to. Gale raised an eyebrow slightly. That will cause a reaction. Orin nodded. Yes, he said. It will. The beat. And the alternative, he added, is that only their version exists. The order went out. Across independent relays. Through human-built networks. Unfiltered. Unedited. Time-stamped. Accurate. Within hours, the footage spread. Across trade networks. Private channels. Independent systems. Watched by species that had never seen a council enforcement vessel. Reconsider. Withdraw. No shots fired. No threats made. No lines crossed. Except one. For the first time, the council had been challenged. And had stepped back. Not because it was weaker. But because it was unprepared. And that distinction was everything. On Corvin 7, Yara watched the final telemetry update. The Arbitrum exiting range. The bright current resuming course. The resolution holding position a moment longer, then turning, quiet and precise, back toward open space. Laura exhaled slowly. That's going to change things. Yara nodded. It already has. She looked at the network. At the routes. At the agreements forming quietly in the background. At the requests still coming in. At the system adjusting. Not violently. But inevitably. They thought removing us would reduce our presence, Laura said. Yara's voice was calm. They removed our obligation to be careful, she said. The beat. They didn't remove anything else. Far away, in a chamber of black stone and descending rings. Someone replayed the footage. Again. And again. And again. Trying to understand how a situation that had been designed to be simple had become something else entirely. Something controlled. Measured. Unavoidable. Something human. The shift didn't happen all at once. That would have been easier to understand. Easier to respond to. Easier to fight. Instead, it happened the way pressure builds in deep systems. Quietly, unevenly, until suddenly it was everywhere. 3 days after the Saras Belt incident, the Council Logistics Network flagged its first anomaly cluster. Not a failure. Not even a disruption. Just inefficiency. Minor delays across 6 sectors. Transit timing mismatches. Cargo backlog at secondary nodes. Individually, nothing significant. Collectively, unusual. Inside the Council's analysis division, a junior systems officer ran the correlation twice before escalating it. Cross-sector latency increase, she said. Non-random distribution. Her supervisor frowned. Cause? She hesitated. Human absence, she said finally. That was the first time it was said out loud inside the system. Not politically. Not rhetorically. Functionally. Meanwhile, humanity didn't announce anything. Didn't escalate. Didn't retaliate. They just continued. On Corvin 7, Yara Solis adjusted the routing schedule for outer colony supply chains. Shift priority to independent relays, she said. Laura glanced up. All sectors? Not yet. Which ones? Yara highlighted 3 regions. Start with the ones furthest from Council infrastructure. Laura understood immediately. Lowest visibility first. Yara nodded. Then we move inward. The transitions happen smoothly. Quietly. No disruption. No alarms. Just ships changing course. Nodes activating. Traffic redistributing. To anyone watching casually, it looked like optimization. To anyone paying attention, it looked like replacement. Within 48 hours, 12 primary routes that had previously depended on Council relay nodes were operating entirely on human-built infrastructure. No announcement. No declaration. Just a fact. On the 5th day, a mining consortium submitted a formal inquiry. Not to the Council. To a commercial address. Curvin 7. Requesting clarification, the message read, regarding continued access to human relay stations for data transmission and mineral yield coordination. Yara read it once. Then forwarded it to Laura. Standard terms, she said. Laura smirked slightly. They're not even pretending anymore. No, Yara said. They're adapting. The reply went out. Professional. Identical in structure to the agreements already signed. No mention of politics. No reference to the Council. Just business. By day 7, 3 additional trade bodies had entered into formal arrangements with human transit coordination. Each one justified internally. Each one framed as practical necessity. Each one, another thread. And threads, when enough of them connect, become something else. Inside the Council chamber, the tone began to shift. Not publicly. Not in official sessions. But in the spaces between. Corridors. Private rooms. Unrecorded conversations. They're building something, one delegate said quietly. They already built it, another replied. We just didn't see it. The problem wasn't that humanity was escalating. It was that they weren't. Not in any way the Council knew how to counter. No fleets mobilizing aggressively. No declarations of independence. No formal rejection of authority. To systems? Continuing to function. Without permission. That made it difficult to respond. Because response required justification. And justification required an action to point at. What are they violating? One legal advisor asked. Silence. They're not blocking trade. No. They're not attacking infrastructure. No. They're not refusing treaties. No. Another pause. Then what are they doing? No one had a good answer. On the 9th day, the Council attempted its first coordinated countermeasure. Subtle. Contained. Procedural. A directive was issued, reclassifying certain transit corridors as restricted zones under suspended member protocols. Human vessels operating within those zones would require additional authorization. Delays. Just friction. It should have worked. It had worked before. On every other species. But when the directive propagated through the system, something unexpected happened. Human vessels didn't reroute through Council nodes. They didn't request authorization. They didn't slow down. They disappeared. Not physically. Not literally. But from the Council's operational visibility. Because they weren't using Council infrastructure anymore. On Corvin 7, Laura watched the update come in. They've restricted the inner corridors. Yara nodded. Expected. Do we respond? Yara shook her head. We already did. Laura frowned. That's it. Yara gestured to the network map. Watch. The display shifted. Council-controlled routes dimmed. Human-built routes brightened. Traffic flowed. Uninterrupted. They can't restrict what they don't control, Yara said. That realization spread slower inside the Council. But when it did, it landed hard. They're bypassing us, someone said. They're replacing us, another corrected. Still, no aggression. No direct challenge. No line crossed that could justify escalation. Which made escalation dangerous. Because acting without justification would fracture the Council itself. And that fracture was already forming. The Velhari had formalized agreements. The mining consortium had followed. A scientific exchange body submitted terms on day 10. Quietly. Carefully. 3 species. Then 4. The more informal, unrecorded, but real. Not alliances. Not defections. Just adjustments. Inside those adjustments, something fundamental was shifting. Dependence. Not on authority. Not on representation. But on function. And function, once established, is very difficult to reverse. On the 12th day, the first real mistake happened. It wasn't large. It wasn't strategic. It wasn't even coordinated. It was a patrol ship. In a system called the Reach Corridor. A human survey drone, small, unarmed, broadcasting full identification, was conducting mineral analysis. Routine. Documented. Legal. The patrol ship destroyed it. No warning. No escalation. Just a decision. And then, a report. Filed through official channels. Claiming the drone had been operating aggressively. On Corvin 7, the footage arrived within minutes. 3 separate relay captures. Time-stamped. Unambiguous. Laura stared at it. They just handed us something, she said. Yara didn't respond immediately. She replayed the clip. Twice. 3 times. Then she nodded slightly. Yes, she said. They did. Do we escalate? Laura asked. Yara shook her head. No. The beat. We clarify. She opened a new file. Attached the footage. Added documentation. Survey permits. Research objectives. Full transparency. Then she forwarded it. Not to the Council Enforcement Division. Not as a protest. But as a question. To coalition signatories. This is the research documentation associated with the destroyed survey drone. We would welcome clarification on which aspect of this activity was interpreted as aggressive. No accusations. No demands. Just clarity. The message propagated. Through formal channels. Through private ones. Through the same networks now carrying human-built infrastructure and human-recorded truth. And this time, the silence that followed was not procedural. It was political. Because now the Council wasn't facing a challenge. It was facing a mirror. And not every species liked what it showed. On Corvin 7, Yara closed the file and leaned back. Laura watched her. That's going to split them, she said. Yara nodded. Yes. Was that the plan? Yara considered the question. Then shook her head slightly. No, she said. The beat. But we were ready for it. Outside the station, traffic continued to flow. Ships moving along routes that hadn't existed a year ago. Networks operating independently of systems that had once defined them. No war. No open conflict. Just a steady, irreversible shift in how power actually worked. And at the center of it, humanity. Not louder. Not more aggressive. Just no longer asking permission. The fracture didn't begin with a vote. It began with hesitation. Inside the Council, hesitation was rare. The system wasn't built for it. It was designed for structure, motions, responses, procedures that moved forward whether individuals agreed or not. Momentum was the Council's greatest strength. And its greatest weakness. The survey drone incident disrupted that momentum. Not because it was large, but because it was clear. Clarity is dangerous in political systems. It removes interpretation. It strips away the space where decisions can be justified after the fact. 3 relay recordings. Unarmed drone. No deviation from protocol. No aggression. And then, destruction. Followed by a report claiming the opposite. That contradiction didn't stay contained. It spread. Quietly at first. Shared between analysts. Then between advisors. Then between delegates. Not as outrage. Not as accusation. But as a question no one wanted to answer incorrectly. Is this defensible? In 6 different Council delegations, that exact question was asked in 6 different ways. And in at least 3 of them, the answer was the same. No. The coalition that had supported the suspension of humanity had been built on alignment. Shared concern. Shared fear. But fear is unstable. It binds quickly. It breaks faster. The first crack appeared in private. A message sent outside official channels. Not to the council. To Corvin, 7. Yara read it once. Then forwarded it immediately. To General Maris Tove. The subject line was simple. Personal communication, Velhari channel. Maris opened it in her office. Empty walls. Clean desk. No distractions. She read it once. Then again. Slower. General Tove, this communication is not official. The coalition supporting enforcement measures is not unified. At least 3 member species are reconsidering their position following the survey drone incident. Internal disagreement is increasing. We require clarification. Is humanity seeking resolution or escalation? Signed, Consul Dina. Maris set the message down. She didn't respond immediately. Henry Lowe stood across from her, silent. Waiting. Well, he asked finally. Maris didn't look up. They're splitting, she said. Henry nodded. 3 species. At least. He considered that. The coalition has 6. Yes. 3 withdrawing support means. It means the resolution loses majority backing, Maris said. Silence settled in the room. Not uncertainty. Calculation. Henry tilted his head slightly. So what do we want? Maris finally looked up. Her expression was calm. Precise. We want exactly what we've always wanted, she said. She picked up the message again. Opened a reply. And began typing. Her response was shorter. Deliberate. Consul Dina, humanity seeks fair treatment, legal recognition, and stability within the galactic system. We are not pursuing escalation. We are prepared to discuss resolution. She paused. Then added one more line. If reconsideration is occurring, we welcome clarity on what that looks like in practical terms. She sent it. Henry exhaled softly. That's it. Maris nodded. That's enough. Because now, the next move wasn't theirs. It was the council's. The reply came 12 hours later. Not directly. Not formally. A meeting request. Neutral ground. Classified as a commercial arbitration session. Which meant no council authorization required. No political acknowledgement. No official record. Convenient, Henry said. Maris nodded. Necessary. Who do we send? Maris didn't hesitate. Yara. Henry raised an eyebrow. Not you. Maris shook her head. This isn't a military conversation. The beat. It's a functional one. And Oren. He comes later, she said. The meeting took place on a mid-orbit trade station. Unremarkable. Deliberately so. No flags. No insignias. No formal seating arrangements. Just a table. 4 participants. And a conversation that would determine whether the situation stabilized. Or fractured completely. Yara Solis entered without ceremony. Composed. Observant. Across from her sat 3 Velhari officials. Including Consul Dina. No greetings. No formalities. Dina spoke first. The coalition is unstable. Yara nodded. We are aware. 3 member species are prepared to withdraw support for enforcement measures. Yara didn't react outwardly. Under what conditions? Dina exchanged a glance with the others. A document was placed on the table. Not labeled. Not formatted for council submission. Just terms. Yara read them carefully. Then again. When she looked up, her expression hadn't changed. But something behind it had. This suspends the coalition resolution, she said. Yes. Pending independent review. Yes. With a joint oversight committee. Dina inclined her head. Yara tapped the document lightly. This section, she said, regarding expansion oversight. Dina nodded. It allows inquiry. Not restriction. Correct. Yara leaned back slightly. Processing. This wasn't surrender. It wasn't victory either. It was something else. Balance. You're asking for visibility, Yara said. Yes. Not control. Yes. The pause. And in return, Yara said, you withdraw support for enforcement. Yes. The room went quiet. Because this was the turning point. Not a battle. Not a confrontation. A decision. Yara closed the document. This is acceptable, she said. No hesitation. No negotiation. Because this wasn't the moment to extract more. It was the moment to lock the shift in place. Dina studied her. You anticipated this. Yara met her gaze. We prepared for it. A slight movement of Dina's eyes. Understanding. Then we proceed, she said. The document was signed. Not officially. Not publicly. But binding. And more importantly, back on Earth Command, Maris read the finalized framework. Then she opened a secure channel. Kale. Oren's voice came through almost immediately. I'm here. We have a framework, she said. Velhari. And 2 others. A pause. That's 3, Oren said. Yes. Another pause. Longer. That's the majority, he said quietly. Maris allowed herself the smallest shift in tone. Exactly. What does it require? Your signature. Oren didn't respond immediately. Maris waited. Finally, that's the game, he said. Not triumph. Not relief. Recognition. Yes, Maris said. It is. The council didn't collapse. It didn't fracture publicly. It didn't descend into conflict. Because systems like that rarely break dramatically. They adjust. Quietly. Reluctantly. And when they do, history records it as if it had always been inevitable. Within days, the coalition resolution was formally suspended. Not overturned. Not rejected. Suspended. Pending review. Which, in council language, meant it was over. The enforcement measures stopped. Transit restrictions quietly relaxed. Inspection protocols deprioritized. No announcement connected these changes directly to humanity. But everyone knew. Because everyone had seen the footage. The network. The agreements. And the moment, in the Saras belt, where the council had hesitated. On Corvin 7, Laura watched the updates roll in. They're backing off, she said. Yara nodded. Not completely, Laura added. No, Yara said. They won't. The beat. They don't need to, she added. Because the goal had never been to defeat the council. It had been something much more difficult. To change how it worked. Laura leaned back slightly. So that's it. Yara looked at the network. At the routes still active. At the agreements still binding. At the systems that now existed. Independent of permission. No, she said. The pause. That's the turning point. Far away, in the council chamber, delegates prepared for the next session. Agenda updated. Terms revised. Language adjusted. Not to undo what had happened, but to incorporate it. Because that's what systems like this do. When they can't win, they adapt. And this time, they were adapting. To humanity, the chamber looked exactly the same. That was the first thing Kale Oren noticed. Same black stone. Same descending rings. Same half-circle of light cutting through the center like a deliberate design choice meant to imply order. Nothing had changed. Which meant everything had. He walked in at the same pace he always had. Measured. Unhurried. Behind him, Cole Farrow carried the same case. Same posture. Same quiet awareness. A year ago, they had walked out of this chamber. Silenced. Removed. They walked back in. And this time, no one was waiting to see how a human would react. They already knew. Oren reached the 4th ring. Looked at the seating arrangement. There were more seats. Not dramatically. Not enough to feel like dominance. But enough to be undeniable. Representation adjusted. Population acknowledged. Economic weight factored. It had taken 11 weeks to finalize the formula. Not because it was complex, but because it was correct. And correctness, in systems built on negotiation, is often the hardest thing to accept. Oren sat. Steady. He looked upward. At the higher rings. 3 seats were empty. 1 species suspended. Another withdrawn. A third, reconsidering its position quietly, somewhere outside formal record. Consequences. Not declared. But real. Different room, Cole murmured. Oren shook his head slightly. No, he said. Same room. The beat. Different understanding. The session was called to order. No ceremony. No acknowledgement of what had happened. Because acknowledgement would require admitting something had gone wrong. And systems like this rarely do that directly. Instead, they move forward. Item 1. Oren's name. He stood. No notes. No hesitation. This council suspended humanity 1 year ago, he began. His voice carried cleanly through the chamber. Measured. Unforced. The stated reasons were compliance concerns, behavioral assessments, and sociological evaluation. The pause. The actual reason, he continued, was fear. That word didn't echo. It settled. Not as accusation. As fact. Fear of our growth, he said. Fear of our expansion. Fear of what we might become. He let the silence sit. I understand that, he added. A subtle shift in the room. Because understanding is harder to argue with than anger. But fear, Oren said, is not a legal basis for suspension. Another pause. And silence is not a strategy. He opened the case. Removed a single document. Placed it on the table. The new accord, he said. No dramatics. No emphasis. Just a statement. Most of you have reviewed it, he continued. I will not repeat its contents in full. He rested his hands lightly on the table. It establishes proportional representation. It establishes oversight that includes all affected parties. It establishes transparency where there was previously assumption. A glance across the chamber. It establishes balance. His eyes moved briefly to Consul Dina. A small nod returned. It also establishes something less formal, Oren added. A slight pause. Understanding. He leaned forward slightly. The year you silenced us, he said, was the most productive year in human history. No one interrupted. Because they had seen it. The Independent Transit Network. Dozens of formalized trade agreements. New colonies. Resolved disputes. He let each one land. All of it, he said, accomplished without your permission. Not defiance. Not pride. Just reality. You removed our seat, Oren said. You did not remove our presence. The chamber was completely still now. Because that was the truth that couldn't be avoided. He picked up the document again. The new accord does not require us to be smaller, he said. The beat. It requires us to be understood. A delegate from the middle rings activated a question marker. Careful. If you anticipated the suspension, she asked, why did you not prevent it? Oren didn't answer immediately. Because that question mattered. Preventing it, he said finally, would have required us to change what we are. A slight shift in his tone. To grow less. To build less. To be easier to accept. He shook his head once. That is not negotiation, he said. The beat. That is surrender. Silence again. So we prepared, he continued. No emphasis. No drama. Just clarity. Not for a specific outcome, he said. But for the moment when the system failed to account for us. He let that sit. And when that moment came, he added, we were ready. Across the chamber, Consul Vorith finally looked up. For the first time since the session began. Ambassador Oren, he said slowly. His voice different now. Less certain. More measured. The Let Hani delegation would like to propose further discussions. Not formal. Not structured. An expanded partnership. Oren met his gaze. A year ago, that same voice had delivered the suspension. It was asking. Oren nodded once. We would welcome that, he said. No hesitation. Because this was the outcome. Not dominance. Alignment. The session moved on. Other items. Other discussions. But the shift remained. Not loud. Not dramatic. But permanent. Later, as the chamber emptied, Cole walked beside Oren. That's it? He asked quietly. Oren considered that. Then shook his head slightly. No, he said. He reached into his jacket, pulled out his communicator, typed 3 words. We're back in. He sent it. The reply came in 11 seconds. 2 words. Now work. Oren smiled, just slightly. Then put the communicator away. Outside the chamber, the corridor still smelled faintly of antiseptic. Some things didn't change, but the meaning of them did. A year ago, that corridor had led away from power. Today, led back into it. Not granted. Built. Above the station, ships moved along routes that hadn't existed before. Networks operated independently, but not separately. Connected. Integrated. Stronger. Because of what had happened. Not despite it. Humanity hadn't won a war. They hadn't needed to. They had done something far more difficult. They had changed the system, without breaking it. And in doing so, they had proven something the Council would not forget again. A seat at the table can be taken away. But a presence is something you build. And once it's built, it doesn't ask permission to exist.